All right, July 1st, 2026, a few days away from the 250th birthday of the Republic. And should be a fabulous weekend. Fireworks everywhere, every corner, every street. I've never seen so much excitement about fireworks. Looking forward to that. We have a great guest today. We do have uh, a update on my friends John Butler and Llewellyn King, who are actually indisposed due to medical challenges. Everything is okay. Nobody's in life or death situation, but they are taking care of some matters that happened over the last 2, 3 days. So unfortunately, they're not present with us. So our best wishes to them. Um, and I have to say before I introduce Jason that it's really amazing what's going on with the innovation path of the industry. I posted on LinkedIn just a map of the growth that is going on in Texas, published by the Controller's Office in Texas. And uh, that posting, which basically shows that our economy ended December of 2025 at $2.9 trillion, which is a phenomenal growth from year to year. And obviously, we're going to crack the $3 trillion already, and we'll probably finish around 4 trillion by the end of 2026, given what's happening in Texas, growing way too fast. But it seems that it's not going to slow down. And there are so many things going on. And one of those growth that is coming is what I call the flying economy and everything that is happening with, sort of commercial and individual flying of all kinds of vessels. So it's really fascinating to see where things are heading and how fast things have changed uh, in the last, say, 2 or 3 years. And with the advancement of, let's say, easy to use AI, the growth of what these unmanned vessels can do is just exploding. So it's good to have our guest today, Jason Day, who serves as Deputy Director of DRONERESPONDERS, the world's leading nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the use of uncrewed aircraft systems, or UAS, counter UAS, and advance air mobility in public safety. In this role, Jason works with public safety agencies, government leaders, industry partners, and policymakers to accelerate the safe and effective integration of emerging aviation technologies into emergency response, disaster management, and critical infrastructure operations. Prior to joining Drone Responders, which is where I met him, he was the director of UAS and Advanced Air Mobility for the Texas Department of Public Safety, also known as Texas DPS, where he led one of the nation's most advanced. I think that's just a bit of a humbleness statement. It is the nation's most advanced statewide public safety drone program. His leadership helped shape operational standards, regulatory frameworks, and mission concepts for law enforcement, emergency management, border security, search and rescue, disaster response, and aviation innovation. He's a recognized leader in public safety aviation and has an extensive experience developing large-scale UAS programs. And I could go on and on about Jason, but Jason, welcome to the program.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jason, lots of interest in what's happening in the different elements of unmanned aircrafts. Uh, let's start somewhere where maybe it hits most common sense for people, which is larger drones or copters, or however we want to call them. Uh, you know, uh, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. There's all kinds of acronyms and language around that. But basically, I can buy a vessel, 100K, $1 million, and transport myself or me and my wife or 4 or 5 people. And obviously, the use cases are many. Taxis from the airport to downtown seems to be the most common one that is taking off. And there are several vendors delivering devices, vessels already. They're either about to be ready to go, they're ready to go. Many of them are flying and doing pilots and all that. Can you tell us the state of that and where things are and your thoughts on how is it going?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of a great segue, and that's really what the conversation is right now. So earlier this year, drone responders, we kind of expanded our scope and our mission, right? The organization's been around since 2019, and it was really focused on being a voice for public safety UAS operations. But now it really goes a lot farther than that. And that's why we've got this focus on the counter UAS and the advanced air mobility side of it, because the national airspace continues to get more populated, especially in the low altitude areas. So it's incumbent upon the entire aviation community to come together to have these conversations and to start educating everybody on what's going on, not only in your city, your county, your state, but across the entire United States. Drone delivery has been a big part of this. Here in Texas, we've got the DFW key site where, there's been I can't give you the exact number, but I know it's been over 1 million deliveries over the past couple of years. And this impacts public safety operations because you've got public safety drones that are in the air and all of these drone deliveries that are going on. And how do we do all of this safely? Now, as we've seen, air taxi testing has gotten underway. And I was just talking the other day with Mike Leo, who runs the drone program for FDNY. And that's where this air taxi testing is going on. So FDNY and NYPD have to be in constant communication with these air taxis, because what's unique about the New York environment is even under FAA regulations, they can operate up to 400 feet over those skyscrapers. And that's the same type of airspace that these air taxis are operating on. So we have to have a complete airspace operational picture every time anybody goes out there to do any type of operations. And that's going to be incumbent upon two new technologies, or one old technology and one new technology. The expansion of the use of drone detection outside of public safety for the private sector is going to be incredibly important, whether that's RF, or acoustic or visual or remote ID or some type of coupled sensor that does all of these things. It gives you an idea of who's in the airspace so that you can conduct operations safely and efficiently, because none of us want to run plastic into plastic. The
Mhm.
first time a public safety drone runs into a commercial drone operator from Amazon or Wing or somebody, the head of those companies then going to call the chief or the sheriff or the mayor of that town, and all of that's going to roll downhill to the operators, right? So public safety has to be a good steward of the airspace and cooperate with all of these entities. To do that, you have to know everybody that's up there, what's going on in the airspace. The other part of that is unmanned traffic management. And this is going to be a huge piece to enable the visualization of all of the low altitude aviation assets so that package delivery drones and air taxis can reroute around critical public safety operations. And we've been working, drone responders and public safety here in Texas, closely with NASA and the FAA on how do we enable this public safety prioritization? How do we visualize this? How do we make sure this information is easy for the public safety operator to indicate, but more importantly, extremely easy for the drone delivery and the air taxis to actually visualize in some type of unified interface.
Mhm.
So it's all one big picture. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, all U.S. operations come down to airspace safety because if you can't do it safe, you also can't do it efficiently and effectively.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you and I have had the opportunity of sharing some work with DOT aviation about the planning and potential inroads of how government should play a role in the flying economy. And it seems to be that the biggest challenge is the sort of the not really the rules, even though, the rules are not trivial, and some of the rules perhaps will have a lot of opposition at some point from some different stakeholders, but really the enforcement. What are your thoughts about how do we go about enabling, hundreds of thousands, millions of flights between unmanned drones and vertical takeoff and landing vehicles? And what are your thoughts about how do we get there? What needs to happen?
Well, it starts with education. It starts with everybody understanding that this is not something that's happening in the future. It's happening right now. And
Hmm.
then getting outside of their bubble and learning about how can they do their operations safely in this new type of environment. And our
Hmm.
organization, that's really what we're all about. We just started an AAM UTM working group where we have private partners like Wing and Amazon, Zipline, those companies, the FAA, NASA, and public safety coming together to talk about all of these different issues, identify the gaps, and figure out ways to overcome them. But
Hmm.
then we're also at events all across the country. Last week, I was in the Woodlands, just outside of Houston, at the Energy Drone and Robotics Summit. And
Hmm.
drone responders, we have an emergency management forum. And we brought in Wing and Zipline and Onra and all these different providers to talk to public safety. But in that audience, we also have oil and gas, electric, you know, private infrastructure companies, all of these different entities,
Hmm.
because we all need to work together to figure out how we can do this safely. So it
Right.
really starts with the education piece. And then on top of that, you have to couple technology solutions that can
Right.
enable all of this, right? Anybody that has a self-driving car out there knows that the technology is great, but then the next piece is the regulatory environment to
Hmm.
be able to enable this and come up with standardization. My car, the only time it really has a problem with the self-driving stuff is when the roads don't make any sense, right? When you got
Right.
cones going all these different directions, and
Hmm.
my brain is going, I don't know which way to go, and the vehicle definitely can't do that. So
Right.
when the regulatory environment hasn't been built out, when you don't have these highways in the sky that have been designated, it's hard to enable some of this, autonomy that allows us to do this at scale, to get to that, millions of drone flights a week and
Hmm.
everybody being able to cooperate. There's a lot of good steps. There's been the Safer Skies Act that is allowing more use of drone detection. There's 2209, which is going to allow more protection over critical infrastructure. And then there's Part 108, which is going to allow for more BVLOS operations. So you start coupling all of these pieces together, and eventually we'll get to a framework where we've got that holistic highway, right, at 400 feet and below that we can all operate in at scale.
Right. 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 Now, when you think about sort of the systems to run this stuff, and how perhaps data is needed. You have obviously GIS, CAD systems that are sort of, or call it digital twin, where people are, sort of logically positioning what all these assets look like. And I would imagine that with that information, or at least some of that information, and not all of it, you can create then a map for the unmanned vehicles to understand how to fly the mission. But then, is there real time interaction or all different kind of data, maybe flight data from other vessels, or how does that all come about? The fact that do you need to fly a mission? You need to use certain standards on mapping? Is there such a thing as, can I get my maps from some agency or somewhere where I can see all that is there, the height of those buildings and everything, so I don't hit something? Or how does that work?
Well, in the public safety world, we've kind of solved this problem, especially here in Texas. We have
Mhm.
a tool that used to be solely used by DoD or DOW that is
Mhm.
now available to basically anybody, and that's called TAC, Team Awareness Kit.
Mhm.
It, on the civilian side, it's called CivTAC, and it is literally a mobile-friendly dots on a map platform that can ingest almost any sensor that you can throw at it. So, for example, for public safety in Texas, the state of Texas, specifically through Texas DPS, hosts a Texas tax server. And there's over 100 different agencies that are on this, and everybody can see each other. And you can turn things on like ADSB information, so you can see what's going on in the airspace. You can turn on drone detection that is pulling data from multiple sensors into one single pane of glass. And then you can
Mhm.
turn on all the drone operations. So I can see if there's operators in the Houston area, you can see the state, you can see the county, you can see the city, all of these drones going on at the same time.
Mhm.
This is one of those tools that we have shown off to the FAA and NASA as this is how it can be done, right? Because there
Mhm.
are standards to be able to ingest that data through very, very simple API mechanisms. And we've
Mhm.
worked with, vendors. One of the primary public safety drone vendors out there is DroneSense, and they provide just a simple API. You ingest it into your tax server, and all of your drones show up. The same
Mhm.
thing will need to be done with UTM. The problem right now is that is still in the development phase. For so
Mhm.
many years, everybody has seen this problem, and there's been multiple efforts to solve that same problem, but none of those efforts were working in collaboration. Now there's a thing called the UTM cohort, where all of these private sector entities have come together to say, we're going to build out the standards. This is what the standards will look like, and this is how you can play into the ecosystem. And so now you're seeing public safety drone vendors like DroneSense um,
Mhm.
actually be part of this process. And then that information gets filtered down to public safety because
Mhm.
we are not far off from your normal public safety operator looking at, their GCS screen or an iPad or Android tablet, seeing their drones, all the other agency drones, and everything else that's at 400 feet and below right there.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Interesting.
data sharing, everybody, especially in the public safety world, says, "Oh yeah, we'll share data with everybody." It doesn't always turn out to be true. Some of
Right.
the gaps that we've seen is data sharing on the federal level is very difficult. I was at a
Mhm.
conference about a year and a half ago, and we're talking about drone detection and FIFA World Cup planning and all of this data that's being collected across the United States. I'm
Mhm.
like, where is the national database where all of this data is going? And it doesn't exist. They've got it on Northcom is federated with Southcom and they can share data, but it's not getting filtered down to anybody else. So
Right.
a good example of that is, let's say there's a drone detected over one of the World Cup games in California,
Mhm.
and it's determined to be nefarious. They don't catch the person, they actually get away.
Mhm.
And then that same drone is being flown by the same nefarious actor in Arlington, Texas. There is no
Mhm.
way for any of these systems to be coupled together to say, hey, this drone was just seen in California over one of the games, and now it's probably a threat in here, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the development of data standards and data sharing with the thought process of it needs to be transparent. We need to take into account PII and the protection of all of this information.
Mhm.
It's extremely important.
Yeah.
And It's a big gap to overcome, but once we do, that's what's going to really enable the next generation of all of this technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, if I think about what you're saying as it relates to, for example, automobiles. So license plates and driver's license are driven state by state. There is no nationwide for by the feds to see all that data nationwide, right? Or is there?
I'm going to say there's not a national database. I don't know
Hmm.
this for a fact. However, I know that the mechanisms are in place
Hmm.
for each state to request that information in real time from another state, right?
Oh, okay.
But even on a statewide level,
Hmm.
drone detection information for Houston PD is not inside some type of database that is readily accessible by Dallas or Arlington or San Antonio or anybody else.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating how somehow, the notion of an FAA agency like, and maybe this is a conversation you and I were just having about, should DPS, Department of Public Safety, be nationwide, and should it be the one managing what goes on in the 10,000 foot below level? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know who the right person to do it is, or the right agency. Obviously, there's a large cost involved with any type of data storage like this. But there are, systems like this. You bring up uh, Texas DPS is also motor vehicle division, so all
Hmm.
license plates and driver's licenses are processed through Texas DPS. And there's lots of data like that. So it's just really about coming up and having a conversation between the states and the federal government on where the right place to put all of this data and house it is.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example, and this no secret because it's widely publicized, but Homeland Security and the FBI built out a system for public or for them primarily called the Discover tool. And the Discover tool allowed you to, if you had drone detection and you got a detected drone, public safety or law enforcement could request access to the system, and then they could see if that drone had prior approval to fly in those areas. So if you're detecting a drone over an airport, you can log in and you can see their authorization that they're now authorized to fly over that airport. Because the FAA, weirdly enough, has handled drone registration data very differently than manned aircraft data. If you pull up any of the bazillion apps that are out there for looking at the national airspace, you can see every helicopter, every airplane that's flying around. And when you click on it, it will tell you what it is, what the registration number is, and most of the time, even the owner of the aircraft. But no
Hmm.
system like that exists for drones. Why? Because the amount of drones that exist that are registered and in the airspace far exceed what anybody predicted 10 years ago.
Hmm.
On drone detection here in the Austin area, there's 50,000 drone flights detected every 6 months in one, medium-sized metropolitan area. Imagine you take that across the entire United States. How do
Yeah.
you house all of that data and process it in real time? We're not there yet. We're getting there. People are working
Hmm.
on it, but it doesn't quite exist yet.
Yeah. 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 Now, let's go back to how this whole thing started. You were at Texas DPS 10 years plus. How do you get, were you hired to develop the UAS program, or how did
Mm.
that come about?
No, when I started with DPS, we didn't even have a drone program. Um, my background is actually manned aviation. So I've worked on helicopters for about 30 years. I've been
Mm-hmm.
in aviation for about 30 years. And I
Mm-hmm.
came on to DPS to maintain all the, we'll call it the tactical avionics and electronics, right? The
Mm-hmm.
cameras, the mapping systems, the radios, things like that. And then about a year and a half into being with DPS is when we started getting into the drone world. And so at some point, I was doing 50% helicopter work, 50% drone stuff until the program got so massive that it required a full-time program manager. And then
Mm-hmm.
that just, elevated more and more. And that program nowadays, it's by far the largest public safety drone program that exists. They have over 400 pilots, 400 aircraft. They conduct about 50,000 drone flights a year just within that one agency. And then you couple on all the other state agencies, Texas Military Department, Texas Parks and Wildlife. Um, you've got this massive fleet that can respond very quickly to any disaster in the state.
Mm-hmm.
We all know, if you're from Texas, that Texas has more natural disasters than any other state. So we have to have the resources to be able to respond to these things. And when we had like the Kerrville flooding last year, right? It was everybody working together to provide a response to that, including our private sector partners. And we got a call from Wing that they were going to bring down all their delivery drones and help out down there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had these contacts, right? We had worked out airspace deconfliction. So it goes back to what we were talking about earlier is getting outside of your bubble and knowing everybody that else is that's in the industry, that's an aviation stakeholder, so that you can leverage all of that into a force multiplier.
Right, right, right. Now, it seems to me, that you have had a phenomenal journey, and it's been, I would imagine an incredible amount of fun, and it's your passion. So, but that said, when it comes to technology, I'm curious if you can share your formulas or your secret for success. There is an incredible amount of technology that is coming at this sector, right? AI, edge computing, BVLOS, detect and avoid, autonomous, 5G, private LTE, satellite connectivity. I mean, how do you keep up? How do you keep up?
You got to work a lot of hours. Just ask my wife. Um, Yeah, but it's about going out there and realizing that you don't know everything. I guess if I have a superpower, it is that I'm a really good listener and a sponge. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people spend too much time talking, not enough time listening.
Right.
So, when I go out to things, I just listen to everything that everybody says so that I can start to absorb this knowledge so that I can take those tools and those lessons and apply them to previously the DPS drone program and now the drone responders and our mission of pushing this forward.
Yeah.
But it's all about, we like to say hugs and high fives, getting out there, building out a network, getting to know everybody, and stealing as much institutional knowledge as you can from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you look at aviation, right? I mean, I don't know, you may know the data because you've been in the industry for a long time, but I think that, at some point the cockpit cabin with the captain and the whatever, the first flight guy and the second flight guy, and there's usually two or three people in the cabin depending on the plane. Um, at some point, the planes started landing themselves, started taking off themselves, started flying themselves. And now I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, the crew that flies the plane is just there to watch things and make sure that nothing goes wrong. Is that right?
Well, that's very true. And this can even be expanded because what's nice about being in the air, there is no traffic, there's no traffic lights, there's very few other drivers around you that you have to avoid, unlike autonomous vehicles, right?
Right.
I don't ever drive my own car anymore. I just say this is where I want to go and it gets me there. And it works incredibly reliably. But in the air, it's even simpler because you are told an altitude and then you go to that altitude, you fly basically a straight line to your destination, then you come in and land. And so much of that process is now automated. So much so that probably everybody in the back of that plane does not want to know how automated that is, right?
Right.
But you always have to worry about, and this is when we talk about training drone pilots,
Hmm.
we talk about you still have to have the human in the loop for the time being, because right now you're still talking to somebody over the radio so that you know what runway that you need to land on or other aircraft to avoid, these kind of things. That kind of process is not automated yet.
Right.
So you still have to have the human in the loop part of it. You also have to worry about, at least for now, complacency, because as these things become more autonomous, we lose muscle memory. So when things do go sideways, right, all of these systems have redundancies upon redundancies, but
Hmm.
there can be some type of critical failure where all the redundancies fail simultaneously, and now the human has to take back over. If they've lost their muscle memory, if
Right.
they have if they're no longer paying attention and they're sitting there on their phone and now you've got, something happen, they have to be able to react instantaneously. So we have to kind of balance the
Mhm.
autonomy with the human factor stuff to keep everybody safe in this industry.
Sure. 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 And I mean, there are so many facets of this. And I was telling you earlier that, I was born in Venezuela, and Venezuela has recently been hammered with multiple earthquakes and comebacks of those earthquakes. I think some 40 shakes after the first two earthquakes, and the devastation is tremendous. And one of the biggest things that I heard that they're trying to use is drones to rescue the people. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works, and what these drones have that is so unique?
Yeah, absolutely. So what most people don't actually know about drone responders is we are a nonprofit program under AIRT, the Airborne International Response Team.
Hmm.
And AIRT is the official home of drone responders. But AIRT is a NGO that does exactly what you're talking about here. When there is some type of disaster somewhere in the world, they send teams out to provide real-time response with drones. And we live in a world now that the capabilities of these aircraft are phenomenal. You've got tiny little drones that you can be wearing goggles and you can fly under debris into buildings. They have thermal cameras and they can find victims that are inaccessible by the boots on the ground. And then you have heavy lift platforms that can fly for hours and hours that have 4K, 8K cameras, that have LiDAR sensors, that have thermal imaging, that have edge computing or AI backhaul processing that is analyzing the images the drone is seeing at the pixel level. So if you're looking for things specifically, you can type in, I'm looking for things that look like a human being, hands, feet. Um, I knew a group of people, let's say there was a stadium collapse and everybody was wearing red because that's the team's color, right? You can now, at the pixel level, these cameras can detect and alert the operator to where it's seeing these things. And then you're
Hmm.
taking all of this and you're pushing it back into the cloud where it's now being processed again. And you've got more AI tools that are just constantly looking at every image to make the response more efficient. This is the world that we live in now. LiDAR allows you to do high precision, high fidelity laser scanning to be able to see things under rubble, around buildings, under tree canopies, all of these things to get a complete digital twin of
Mm-hmm.
of the disaster area. And then you can now use that for real-time decision making. It's a
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal tool.
Wow. Wow. Incredible. Yeah, it's I cannot see a world without all this happening, these technologies, because I mean the benefit, when I was at Austin Energy, which is the electric utility in Austin owned by the city, we started looking at drones just to inspect the power lines, right? And when you compare that to before the drones showed up, the old way of doing it was you either drive on a truck underneath the lines, miles and miles, with incredible high power binoculars to see any cracks on the lines, right? That's a very tedious and slow process. Then the next best thing was to fly on a helicopter on a line that perhaps had an issue with the similar, high-powered helicopters with thermal vision, whatever, and to see the crack in the lines. But now with the drones, they can do it all the time. They can do it consistently, and and it's just been, sort of like a revolutionary thing just on that use case. I can't imagine, public safety without these technologies. It's definitely a game changer. So I have a question from the audience here. Uh, uh, Jason, Dixon Wright writes, are you familiar with the trade group Association for Uncrewed Vehicle System International?
Yes, absolutely. That's AUVSI. They're
Uh-huh.
actually, that's their annual conference, Exponential. Drone Responders is co-located at,
Hmm.
and AUVSI has state chapters.
Hmm.
And in Texas, that state chapter is the AUVSI Lone Star chapter, which I am a board member of.
Okay. 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 It's you definitely, some folks in the audience are very excited about your talk and your sharing. So uh tell me about what are your thoughts about the cybersecurity challenges or the potential issues of bad actors trying to hack your drone when it's flying. Where are we on that? What is the state of the technology on that? Is that an issue? Do we have to worry about that, or how does that work?
Well, I can't tell you of any confirmed cases of that. I'll actually go back a few years. I'm sure everybody's familiar with ADSB, and that's where there was a mandate a decade ago that all helicopters and airplanes in any class of airspace except for Class G had to transmit and receive um,
Hmm.
data that had position and altitude and direction and all of this information. The big concern with this mandate was it created a data link between aircraft and the aircraft on the ground. And they thought that people were going to be able to use that data link to hijack aircraft.
Hmm.
I know of no confirmed cases that has ever happened.
Hmm.
Most drones, the link, if you're flying it over RF, is extremely encrypted, and it
Hmm.
is very difficult to hack into. Now, it's not impossible.
Hmm.
There are ways, there's a difference between actually taking over that signal and just really breaking that signal. A lot of drone mitigation technology just creates a barrier between the drone and the drone pilot, and that automatically sends the drone back.
Hmm.
I don't know of any systems that are currently actually taking control of that drone and landing it wherever they want. And if they are, it's not real-time control. They're sending a signal and it's telling the drone, oh, this is your new landing location, go there right now. And then the drone's going to go do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, nothing is perfect, right? I am
Sure.
sure there are lots of people working on that. You know, another kind of analogy for this is there was a story years ago that some college kids actually hacked a Tesla from their laptop sitting on the side of the road. Well, when you actually dove into that, it wasn't very true, right? The car was parked, they were in very close proximity, and they didn't actually have control. They were just able to see some type of functions. So it's not like the vehicle was moving down the highway at a high speed and they were able to do these things.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
again, as AI advances, these kind of things are going to become easier and easier. So it's
Right.
incumbent upon organizations, agencies, the government to identify that it can possibly be a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we have a cybersecurity UAS section for our program management course where we talk about this thing. First, you have to educate yourself on what the risks are.
Right.
Then you have to put in place anything you can to mitigate that risk. I know a lot of like third-party software platforms can be run on-prem so that all of your operations aren't going to the cloud. And you are directly connected to the drone, and all of that data is going into your data center or the back of your truck or wherever. And that's one way to air gap some of this, right? So it's not going out
Mm-hmm.
there and creating a path for cyber criminals. But
Right.
the most important piece goes back to the education piece because if you've educated yourself, you've identified the risk, you've put in place mitigation strategies, you need to share what you are doing and any data that you've found, any reports, anything you've heard from anybody else, and share it with the rest of the community. Right? It goes back to we are all stewards of the national airspace system. So we have to share this information through all the different mechanisms out there that exist, like Digital Roundtable.
Right. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about public involvement. How much of what you guys do and what the state of things, how much of a, acceptance or pushback or what is the state of, the masses of kind of becoming aware, um, wanting to do this, not wanting to do this. What's the latest on that?
Well, there's been many parts of the country over the past 10 years that have had a big problem with that. A lot of city councils, a lot of civil liberty groups have not wanted the police and public safety to be operating drones. And I think part of that is because those agencies, those organizations did not get ahead of that curve and really engage with those groups before they started their program, before they
Mhm.
started rolling out operations. Texas, just the opposite. You would be hard pressed to even go back through historical news coverage on the internet that Texas public safety in any capacity is spying on people's backyards or there's been pushback from communities because we as a Texas public safety ecosystem were very forward thinking on this and we were engaging with every entity that we could from the very beginning.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Jay Stanley with the ACLU, he and I have been on panels together numerous times. He knows what DPS and Texas public safety has been doing in the drone world. He's got no problem with our policies. We go to these type of organizations, say, look at what we're doing. Will you give us any feedback so that we don't raise any red flags, so that we're making sure that we're transparent? In Texas, we also have a government code that forces, especially law enforcement, to do this. Every law enforcement agency in the state has to report every drone flight that they do out there. But the biggest part is we've been very proactive in making sure that other agencies understand that engaging with their communities is a huge part of having their drone program. I'll give you two quick stories on this.
Mm,
Where DPS has its training center, where it trains all of its officers on vehicles and shooting and all of that stuff, is also where the drone training complex is. And it's in Florence, Texas. Small town, population like 1,200. We'd be out flying at night. We'd be doing nighttime training. We've got all these drones in the air, all of these flashing lights. And I'm thinking, I bet to this community, it looks like there's a bunch of UFOs out here,
mm,
right? And they don't know what we're out here doing. So we were proactive. We then got with the high school and the middle school and the elementary school and the mayor and said, why don't we just invite the whole town to come out
mm.
to our training facility and let's talk drones. We'll fly some
Oh,
drones around, we'll bring the kids out, and engage with these STEM programs. And that was very powerful. And it got continued year after year, where now
mm,
it's just a Florence Fly Day where the whole community comes together. I know lots of other agencies that have continued that same model. One of my one of the best stories I love telling is one of the best events that we did every single year was at a church in Cedar Park. It was the Hill Country Bible Church. And they would invite out all the public safety agencies, the local PD, fire, county, Texas DPS. We'd bring a helicopter and we'd bring the drones, they'd bring the fire trucks and the Bearcat and all of this stuff. And so this was their annual fall festival, and all the kids would be inside. They were doing all of their festival stuff, and then they would come outside for bouncy houses and hot dogs and games and stuff. And we would have this big setup of all the public safety agencies. Well, we would always bring drones out there, and we would bring a tethered drone. So that's a drone that's on a cable that can stay up in the air indefinitely, right? Because it's providing power. And then
mm.
we would have a TV at our little booth, and we would be pushing the video from that drone down to the TV. So you could, as you were walking up, you would see yourself on the
Right,
TV.
right.
And so they would release all the kids, and hundreds of kids will come running out of the church, and they're all hyped up on sugar and everything else, and they come running towards our booth. They don't see us. They don't see the drones on the table. They don't see the drone in the air. They see a TV and themselves on that TV. And what's the first thing they start doing? Dancing like they're on freaking TikTok, right? Acting like a bunch of little fools. But that was great
Right.
because now mom and dad, who's chasing after the kid, is now looking over there saying, hey, why is my kid over there acting like an idiot? Now mom and dad walk up and they ask what's going on. And now we've taken the scary out of the police flying drones, right? It's now a
Right.
very fun environment and we're engaging them at their level. And now we're able to have honest conversations. And dad's like, oh yeah, I want to buy one of these. Or mom's like, yeah, we use these at where I work. And it's
Mm.
just a conversation with our communities. And then
Yeah.
we're pushing this information out to STEM programs because it's also workforce development for public safety to show these kids, hey, I could be a cop or a firefighter or emergency manager in the future and do cool things like flying drones or managing a drone program, be involved in some type of technology in public safety.
Right. 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 Now, let's switch gears and talk about standards real quick. I know this is one of your favorite things. So when it comes to standards, I'm a mechanical electrical engineer. So, when you build electrical things, you have UL and Energy Star and all these different standards for different devices. And how does the world of standards work in flying things? What are the agency and where are we on that? Where are we on that journey of everybody using, I don't know, the same type of sensors, the same type of things to communicate, the same type of you know flight in patterns or algorithms or where's the standards world when it comes to unmanned vehicles and all that?
Yeah, basically there are no standards, especially for the actual operations. The one of the few standards that exists is FAA Part 107, but it's just a test on airspace knowledge and aeronautical knowledge. I don't know what the questions are nowadays because it's been 10 years since I took it, but I know when I took that test, it asked me about runway markings. I'm like, why do I need to know about runway markings to fly a drone? Right. So that's really the only standard because now you can go take that test, or if you're just a hobbyist like my wife, you go online and you just take a quiz that costs you nothing, that you cannot fail, and you're now authorized to go fly drones. You've never proved to anybody that you actually know how to fly the drone. And now you're
Hmm.
putting something in the national airspace that could literally take down a 747 or fall on somebody's head and take out their eye.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
huge gap, right? Obviously, that same mentality does not exist in the manned world. You can't just go buy a helicopter and go fly it.
Right. Right.
But the really, the difference in that and a lot of regulations are it was about cost, right? They said, well, your average person does not have the ability to go out and buy a helicopter, or
Hmm.
an airplane. So because it's a much smaller subset of people, there can be all these regulations. So the only way to really enable the proliferation of millions of drones is to remove the barrier of entry, or make it as easy as possible. But that
Hmm.
obviously provides a huge gap because there is no standardization. There is no standardization in the maintenance of any of these aircraft. Most manufacturers will give you maybe a paragraph on how to maintain the aircraft, but it's not like
Hmm.
the standards. Again, my background's all manned aviation. We got manuals, this thick, that things you have to do just every month, right?
Yeah.
You've got multiple manuals if you're doing your annual inspection stuff. That kind of stuff does not exist. So we've had to rely on lessons learned from manned aviation. And that's one of the things that I've always pushed is that anybody operating a drone needs to understand they're part of the aviation community and they are an aviator because they're operating the national airspace system. But the
Hmm.
biggest gap that we found is in training because there is no standardized training. Drone responders last year, we do an annual survey, and it was the largest gap that was identified by public safety was that
Hmm.
there is no standardized training. There's all of these companies doing training. There's all of these different ideas on what the right path forward is. But again, there's no standard. And
Hmm.
last week at the Energy Drone and Robotics Summit there in the Woodlands that I was talking about, this is where we've begun the process of trying to solve that problem. So we brought in multiple organizations from across the country. AUVSI was invited, Vertical Aviation International, the Airborne Public Safety Association, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, um, federal government entities, the Law Enforcement Drone Association, local law enforcement, local public safety, anybody that is out there doing training. We said, let's get in a room and
Hmm.
let's take the next 6 months and build standards.
Right.
Now, when you get a bunch of people in a room that have different ideas, your natural assumption is it's going to take a little bit of work, right? It's probably going to
Hmm.
go Jerry Springer at some point.
Hmm.
We were very lucky. Everybody was very respectful. Everybody listened to everybody's opinion, and a consensus was put together on how to move the needle forward on all of this. And so we're going to take the next 6 months to a year to come up with a cohesive document that can be available for no charge to any organization that's doing UAS training out there that they can leverage as a standard so that everybody is operating in a very similar fashion. Because again, we're all in the same national airspace. We should be operating in it in the same way.
Hmm. Hmm. That's cool. That's cool. So, needless to say, when it comes to the workforce, and as you were saying, there are some courses and the bar is pretty low. But as I suspect, Jason, that you have a license and you fly drones, right?
Well, It's just pet peeve of mine, but there's actually not a license to fly drones. There's only a certificate.
Okay.
Mike O'Shea, who used to work with the FAA, he and I are on panels all the time, and he says, "Oh yeah, you just go out and get your drone license." I'm like, "It's not a license, Mike. It's a certificate."
Right. So, so, but as a pilot, and I take it that you are also a pilot of airplanes. Um, what is the biggest skills to fly a drone? Is it eyesight? Is it what are the biggest skills to have to work on?
Well, let me say that flying a drone is incredibly easy.
Mm-hmm.
Modern drones basically fly themselves. They are difficult to crash. You almost have to try. If my wife was on here with us right now, she would attest to what I'm about to say. There are days that she will come in to the living room and say, "Will you help me turn on my computer?" Right? But
Mm-hmm.
she can fly a drone like nobody's business. She's got a little Mavic Mini. She can fly it through the house, up the stairs, out windows. She took it to Spain with her. She's living on a boat, able to do, orbits and take all of these pictures because they've made it extremely simple.
Mm-hmm.
There is a computer inside that's doing all the work and making sure all the parts are running at the same time. But nothing is perfect. That's
Mm-hmm.
the hard part is you have to know what to do when something goes sideways and
Mm-hmm.
unexpected. It's having some type of training program that's focused on building muscle memory so that you can get that drone on the ground or back to you when it's acting in an unpredictable manner. And this is what most public safety drone programs, the like zero to hero programs, training programs are all about. Just building muscle memory so that if you're out, you're working a large scale event, a helicopter comes in, you don't have to think about how do I get this drone out of the way of that helicopter? Or it's decreasing in altitude. You don't have to think about is this going to land on somebody's head because your muscle memory is just going to take over and you're going to be able to get it back into a situation where nobody is going to get hurt. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the hard part is understanding that mentality. I think I've seen a video where somebody taught chimpanzees how to fly a drone. That really is the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
When things go sideways, that's when you really need skill.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the time here, and time flies when you're having fun. And I've really, really enjoyed, as usual, talking to you. And I have a bunch of rapid fire questions, maybe to give some color to the audience on your preferences. So I have a few. So I'm just shooting quickly, and if you have an answer, you have it. If not, next. So favorite drone platform.
The DJI Avata.
Okay. Most underrated drone technology.
Well, that's a good one. AI vision technology.
Okay. One technology everybody should watch.
Also AI vision technology.
Okay. Biggest misconception about public safety drones.
That they are that they are spying on you in your backyard because they do not care what you're doing in your backyard.
Good one. So BVLOS or DFR, which will have a bigger impact?
Well, they're one and the same because BV loss is an actual FAA term. DFR is not. DFR is a concept. BV loss enables more advanced DFR. So they go hand in hand.
Okay. Okay. So next question. AI, is it hype or is it real?
No, it's so real, especially the vision stuff that's being developed where you can affect whether somebody gets found, whether they live or die, because AI can see things that you cannot. AI doesn't get tired. AI doesn't get complacent.
Mm-hmm.
That is really, it's a huge force multiplier.
Sure, sure. Okay, prediction on urban air mobility. 5 years away, 15 years away, next
I
year.
won't. I won't have to drive down the highway anymore in Austin and be angry at traffic because I'm just gonna get in my air taxi and go from point to point.
Most memorable mission you have ever witnessed?
Hurricane Harvey, probably.
Hmm.
Just the amount of damage. I've never been in a Cat 4 or 5 hurricane environment before, and just seeing the impact to those people and watching them, carry out their entire life's possessions into their front yard and being there to be able to help with that was pretty
Hmm.
phenomenal.
All right, two more questions. One book every drone leader should read, or if
Um,
not a book, a manual or something.
the Drone Responders blog, because it will tell you everything you need to know about drone operations.
Okay. Last one. What's one thing people would be surprised to learn about public safety aviation?
That their primary focus is the safety of the national airspace system over saving people's lives or efficient operations, about the safety of the national airspace.
Hmm. Jason, always full of so much knowledge. I'm so glad with your new journey. Looking forward to staying in touch. Anything that you want to share? Last thoughts? What's in front of you the next 60 days, 90 days?
Sure. Well, so if you are public safety and you're on here, we've got lots of training going on. We've got lots of online training available on the Drone Responders website. We'll be at Commercial UAV Expo in Las Vegas in the end of August, early September, and we'll have a UAS program management course that will be there, and that is for public safety or any industry taking the lessons that have been learned from public safety and applying them to the rest of the private sector. I can always be reached at jason.day@droneresponders.org.
Awesome. Jason, thank you much for being with us today. And thanks everybody for listening to our phenomenal guest. And good luck with the celebrations of the 4th of July, everybody. Happy birthday, America. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye now.
Thank you, sir. It was an absolute pleasure.